to this issue or this episode of the Steve Beaman Journey. It is Thursday, October 16th, 2025. Today, we are going to travel down the physical path, looking for ways to build more stamina, more energy, and more of the stuff it takes to build that path in a free society. So today, let's unpack the physical path and look at the news of the day as we travel this episode of the Steve Beaman Journey.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
In a world of uncertainty, where business, freedom, and the future hang in the balance, one voice rises with clarity, experience, wisdom, and conviction. This is the Steve Beaman Show, the voice of the independent American.
Welcome back, my friends, to this episode of the Steve Beaman Journey for Thursday, October 16th, 2025. And as it's Thursday, we are journeying down the physical path today. This is one of the 5 paths we talk about all the time. On Mondays, we do the financial path. Tuesday, the emotional path. Wednesday, the intellectual path. Thursday, the physical path. And then we end the week on Friday's spiritual path. I hope you find insight and information in these journeys that we take together. And remember, this is first and foremost my journey. So I'm glad you're joining me with it, and I hope you find benefit to it. I do this because, well, life is filled with transitions, and I've been through a number in my life. So this journey is one that helps keep me centered, and I hope it does you too. Before we talk about the physical path, though, as we do each day, let's go down and take a look at the news of the day. And one of the top stories yesterday, we saw another scene that speaks volumes about our times. We had a congressional, I don't know what the word is, but raid on Speaker Johnson's office demanding the immediate seating of a Democratic congressperson. Well, there was no violence, there was no broken glass, no arrests, but the tension was real. It was another reminder to me of how political passions in Washington have so often, I'll say, boil over into confrontation. This isn't left or right or any of that. It's the growing inability in our society to disagree without demonizing. When every policy dispute becomes a crisis, every opponent becomes an enemy, that is a true threat to our democracy. Civil engagement is, and we talk about it often, but it's healthy. Intimidation, even when it's legal and polite, isn't. A free society does not depend on the volume of our anger, but on the strength of our character. And yesterday, we talked about the intellectual path. We talked about truth and discernment. Today's attack, or yesterday's attack, is exactly what happens when that path is abandoned. When education fails to teach critical thinking, you don't get citizens, you get mobs. And when classrooms teach ideology instead of intellect, you breed emotional reaction instead of moral reflection. Now, yesterday's program, I had a lot of feedback on it. Many people, especially on the TikTok feed, were saying I overstated the decline in American education. Well, that's fair enough. I welcome their feedback. But let's unpack it. I brought 5 things that I want to talk about specifically related to my claims on education. I first talked about resentment, victimhood over virtue. Students today are taught to see the world through grievance instead of gratitude. Even every success is suspect. Effort is irrelevant. Everything is taught through the visual of oppression. Now that teaches young people resentment. And if you do that, you'll harvest rage. That's to the second point of revisionism, teaching history as ideology. Textbooks no longer, and in the history classes, we're not teaching context. We're teaching condemnations. And a specific example of that is how our founders are looked at. They're now looked at it as villains. They're looked at as systems of privilege. Well, if we raise a generation of kids who hate their heritage, they're never going to defend it. But this filter that everything is brought through between resentment and revisionism are raising a generation of kids who don't know history and don't understand the intellectual context around that history. But the third comment I made, and one I got a lot of pushback, was on rebellion. And I think of that as authority without accountability. Empowerment in our society has been twisted into entitlement. Teachers, they're not allowed to discipline kids. Students perform defiance for clicks. I mean, we're raising activists fluent in outrage, but illiterate in principle. And as I said it yesterday, I was reminded again of Mao Zedong in his Little Red Book. This was the Cultural Revolution in China that set the younger people against the older people. Well, that's the same thing we're getting in this country today when the Gen Z and the Gen A people are turned against boomers. It's no different than Mao did with his Little Red Book. Let's not forget the Cultural Revolution cost millions of lives. Now, as we look through resentment and revisionism and rebellion, we go to the erosion of core literacy. It is indisputable that reading and math scores have plunged, while social awareness projects have expanded. Logic is out, therapy is in, and a specific example of that is in Illinois. It was recently signed into law by Governor Pritzker as an executive order that all students in Illinois public schools, beginning in third grade, will be required to see a psychologist every year. This is creating citizens who feel deeply, but they think shallowly. And the cultural consequence of this is real. We have a culture that shouts but cannot reason, protests but cannot propose. It's easy to protest against what is. It's hard to come up with solutions. We've now taught generations to express emotion without forming thought, and we live among those consequences. So before anyone says yesterday's, actions were just spirited, and if we look at the 2020 Summer of Love, and before we say those were peaceful protests, let's remember they're part of an education system that prizes emotion over evidence. And that's not coincidence. That's curriculum. So let me move from that defense of myself into hypocrisy in action. This is the assault in Speaker Johnson's office. The attack yesterday, commentators have said, again, this is just civil engagement. But let's look at the nature of it. The nature of it was during a time of government shutdown, which is hurting people, a grandstanding play just to get clicks on a social media site. This is not productive means to get to a dialogue in Congress. This is just a bunch of children going out and shouting as loud as they can to get attention. This is not the kind of a nation or nation's leadership that we need to see. We need these people to be serious people about finding solutions to America's problems, not just grandstanding for the cameras. To me, it's a double standard that is as much moral as it is political. We're teaching the next generation that the louder you shout, the more legitimate you are. And that goes to the heart of that idea of rebellion without responsibility. We're going straight out of the classroom to Capitol Hill. And a nation run by children cannot long sustain. A society ultimately that excuses violence for our allies, it's going to justify tyranny against our enemies. And that's how republics rot, not from invasion, but from infection. So with all that going on in the U.S. and the shutdown continuing, and now real people starting to feel it, NATO has raised the stakes big in the European potential warfare with Russia. The Germans have launched a nuclear testing. It's a war game, if you will. But that war game is amping up the risk that there could be a mistake. They've now announced that they're going to authorize the shooting down of Russian aircraft that penetrate their airspace. We understand it, but at the same time, the U.S. is confirming that we might very well send Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. These are missiles that can reach well into Russia. This kind of escalation is dangerous. And yes, in Europe, they're calling it leadership, but leadership isn't measured by noise or bravado. It's measured by judgment. That same judgment that I talk about missing in our classrooms is missing often in these capitals. Let's never forget that war has a way of seducing the proud. Once leaders start competing over who's tougher instead of who's wiser, well, the countdown begins. We've seen this play out time and time again. Empires fall not from weakness, but from hubris. And this is why today we're talking about the physical path, by the way, and that does tie together because the same principles that govern nations govern individuals. Power must be tempered by control. Well, as that's going on in Europe, I like to talk about our markets because to me that's the great stabilizer. I don't worry about the geopolitical threats if the markets are still going up, and they continue to climb again today, hitting new highs once again. The Dow is showing incredible resilience, which tells me that economic prospects in the United States and the globe are actually better than you hear from the pundits. I mean, markets like muscles tighten under stress. They can endure tension, but what breaks the markets is panic. And we're not seeing any of that on the horizon right now. Yes, people are moving to Bitcoin and to the dollar away from stocks a little bit, but the markets continue their march upward. And let's remember that every trader, every policymaker, and every citizen is feeling the same questions on these things, especially in Europe right now. Who's in control? It's the question of our age, because from Congress, or classrooms to Congress, I'll say, to capital markets, control of thought, control of conduct, and control of oneself is up for grabs. In addition to watching Europe now amp up with the Russian situation, we're seeing globalism on the march. The UN has announced a new program to put on a global tax. Let me talk about that. According to the Wall Street Journal, the United Nations just this week stood poised to impose what amounts to be a global tax on carbon emissions. This is what the journal referred to as the ultimate in taxation without representation. Despite lacking both sovereignty and enforcement, the UN's London-based maritime organization is looking to saddle ships with taxes ranging from $100 to $380 per metric ton. Now, what's interesting is how arbitrary that is, of course, but the tax from this money, where does it go? It goes into a UN bank account with no accountability. Tell me that there's no corruption in that. Now, if this doesn't sound familiar, remember 1776. Americans fought a revolution for taxation without representation, and this clearly is. But the good news, for those of us who care, is President Trump has already warned of sanctions against any country that supports this globalist outreach or overreach. The message is very clear. America will not bow to the bureaucrats in the blue helmets. And let's remember, the U.S. still boasts plenty of coal, wood, and fowl, and that's enough to provide tar and feathers to all of those European bigwigs who think they can take us. If the globalists insist on governing without consent, they're going to have to rediscover how Americans deal with these attempts to tax without representation. So as the world trembles and mobs storm offices in Washington, alliances test red lines, and markets shudder but continue to go up, bureaucrats are scheming to tax the globe. Well, with all of that, the call to strength has never been stronger. But I will tell you that strength doesn't begin in Washington or Brussels or London. Strength begins with you. And that's why what we're about today on the physical path. Because the first battlefield is your body. If you can't master appetite, endurance, and discipline, how do you expect to master the storms around you? And that's why we turn to this physical path. Because discipline, endurance, and the spirit of strength are what matter. A nation of strong people will always outlast a nation of weak excuses. So we now, you and I, live in an age that worships comfort. We call it freedom. We avoid pain, we medicate stress, and we outsource our efforts. And again, as I say to you oftentimes, this is my journey too. As I'm talking to you about this, I'm trying to incorporate these lessons into my own life. Because the physical path is more than just diet or exercise. It's about dominion. It's about learning to rule yourself before we try to rule the world. Because when you master your body, you master your instincts. And when you discipline your habits, you reclaim your will. When you reclaim your will, you recover your freedom. Every form of tyranny, every form ever known, begins the same way. It begins by convincing people they no longer control themselves. Well, I assure you that you do control yourself, and being in charge of your physical body is one step in gaining that liberty and freedom that we all prize so highly. There are 7 points that I want to make today on the physical path. The first point is the forgotten virtue of discipline. I mean, let's remember, discipline isn't punishment. It's training. In fact, the word itself comes from the root disciple, which means student under guidance. In that sense, the physical path is an act of discipleship. It's not to another man, perhaps, but it is to your higher self. Every act of restraint, every skipping the extra drink, every finishing time you finish the run or you say no to a comfort is a statement of your sovereignty. You're saying, my body serves my will, not my weakness. The strongest people that you'll ever meet, and you know this, but they're not the ones who carry the heaviest weights. They're the ones who lift the heaviest burdens, quietly, daily, and faithfully. Discipline, you see, is freedom's muscle. Use it or you lose it. The second point is endurance, the strength to keep going. Endurance, in many ways, is what separates intention from accomplishment. Every dream dies right smack in the middle, when it's no longer exciting, when it's hard, when the crowd is gone. That's where strength is born, by the way. Endurance isn't the glamour, it's gritty. It's the extra mile when nobody's watching, the 5 a.m. alarm when nobody's clapping. It's the I will when feelings say I can't. That's endurance. And here's the truth. Your body teaches your spirit how to endure. If you can endure pain in your muscles, well, you can also endure pain in your mind. If you can push through fatigue on the track, well, you can push through fatigue in your faith. Every push-up, every mile, and every disciplined meal is actually a metaphor. It's proof that perseverance can be practiced. Third point is using your body as a temple of liberty. You know, our founders spoke of liberty not as a license, but as order with purpose. They understood that a free society depends on self-governing citizens, and self-governance begins with self-discipline, self-mastery. Today, in many ways, we've traded virtue for vanity. We post self-care videos while neglecting self-control. We chase energy drinks instead of energy through effort. But we need to remember the body is not an accessory. It's much more, I would say, like an altar. When you treat it with respect, you honor the gift of life. Faith isn't separate from fitness in that way. It's expressed through it. Our Creator gave you and me a vessel. We are to steward it. We talk often about how stewardship and money go hand in hand. Stewardship and the intellectual path go hand in hand. Stewardship and all the paths go hand in hand. Certainly on the physical path, that's true. So we need to strengthen it. As God gave us this vessel, we need to sanctify it. Because how can we ask God to bless our nation if we refuse to strengthen and discipline ourselves? Number 4, the connection between your physical and moral strength. The ancients all knew this, by the way. Courage is physical before it's moral. Think about a coward's body. It always gives it away. Slouched posture, darting eyes, shallow breath. Confidence begins in the stance, not in the speech. Train your body to stand tall and your mind will follow. Breathe deeply, courage will find you, and move with purpose, and meaning will return. And always, societies that neglect the body always decline. Luxury breeds weakness, and weakness breeds dependency. The Romans had a word for it. They called it decadent living. We call it modern convenience. Either way, the result will be the same. A soft body leads to a soft civilization. Point 5, the discipline of simplicity. The physical path that you and I travel together is not about perfection. It's about practice. Start small. Walk 30 minutes a day. Drink more water. Stretch when you wake up. Turn off your phone and take a deep breath of reality. Simplicity is strength disguised as humility. My friends, you don't need to be extreme. You need to be consistent. Strength won't come from doing one hard thing once. It comes from doing small, hard things every day. Remember, when you control the simple, the complex becomes manageable. It's the old thing about how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. When you master this chaos, chaos loses its grip. Number 6, the spirit of strength. Ultimately, as you and I both know, the physical path isn't about just the body. It's about the spirit that animates it. Your body will age. Your spirit decides what that means. There's a power that rises in you when you push through exhaustion, a moment that's when the body says, I'm done, but your spirit whispers, keep going. Well, that whisper, that's life talking back to you. Every rep, every run, every refusal to quit is a declaration from you that says, I am still in control. And that's the message our world needs to hear most right now. Not control over others, but mastery over ourselves. If America wants to regain her strength, she doesn't need another policy. We need citizens that master their own paths. If a citizen who can't do what's hard every day without excuse will break down, because freedom at its core can be thought of as a physical act. It's the act of standing upright when the world bows down. And the 7th and final point, if you're feeling weary from the news and from politics and the chaos, remember this. You and I don't control the headlines, but we do control our habits. We may not change the world overnight, but we can change ourselves before sunrise. Let's together take one disciplined step. Let's eat better, move more, rest intentionally, speak kindly. Reclaim your sovereignty, one small victory at a time. And when enough individuals rise in that strength, our nation will rise with them. So let me recap that real quick, because those 7 things are critically important. The forgotten virtue of discipline, the strength to keep going in endurance, the body as a temple of liberty, the connection between physical and moral strength, the discipline of simplicity, the spirit of strength, and then the path forward is to just take small steps one day at a time. The physical path that we travel is a bridge between intention and action. It turns belief into behavior and purpose into progress. In the end, it's not measured by muscle or fame, it's measured by mastery. Mastery of the body, mastery of your will, and mastery of the moment. Because a strong nation can only be built by strong people. And strong people begin with one decision: to get up, move forward, and never yield. So today, wherever you are, take that step, because freedom begins not in Washington, but in the mirror. So I am always looking forward to responding to the questions that come up and taking your thoughts and opinions, because, well, they're as valid as anybody else's. I welcome the commentary. I welcome the criticisms. But I always want the chance to set the table right and to have that dialogue that says, here's why I said it. So going back to yesterday's commentaries on the intellectual path, I hope that my explanations in the first part of this program did help do that. I look forward to that civil dialogue with you each and every day. So I am Steve Beaman, and this is my journey, and I'm pleased that you're joining with me. So walk wisely, live strongly, and tomorrow I'll see you on the spiritual path as we begin and continue down this journey together. Thank you, and God bless you.